The charity gala in downtown Chicago was a masterpiece of old money elegance. Crystal chandeliers, forced smiles, and the soft hum of violins masking the hollow conversations. I stood there, swirling my scotch, watching my wife, Elena, laugh at a joke made by a man whose hand lingered on her waist a second too long, a touch so familiar it stopped my breath. It wasn't the betrayal that broke me in that moment. It was the perfection of her performance. The way she could look at me with love while carrying a secret that would soon burn our entire world to the ground. If you find yourself drawn to the quiet, devastating unraveling of a life built on beautiful lies, stay with me as we walk into the courtroom where the truth waits to freeze us all. The rain in Chicago didn't wash things clean. It just made the city look like it was weeping oil. Ethan Caldwell stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his 42nd floor penthouse, watching the blurred lights of the traffic on Lakeshore Drive. The glass was cold against his forehead, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat rising in his chest. It was 2:14 a.m. The apartment was silent, save for the hum of the sub-zero refrigerator and the rhythmic breathing of his wife, Elena, in the master bedroom down the hall. 10 minutes ago, Ethan had been a happy man. A tired man, yes, exhausted from a 16-hour bid on the West Loop redevelopment project, but a content one. He had come home, poured a glass of Yamazaki 18, and sat down to check his email on the family iPad that usually stayed in the kitchen. He hadn't meant to see it. It was a technological hiccup, a ghost in the machine. Elena's iPhone had synced with the cloud, dumping a cache of photos into the shared library. Ethan took a sip of the whiskey. It tasted like ash. He looked down at the tablet resting on the marble kitchen island. The screen was still glowing, a beacon of catastrophe in the dimly lit room. There were 12 new photos. They weren't explicit in a pornographic sense, which somehow made them worse. They were intimate. There was a photo of Elena laughing, a genuine head-thrown-back laugh that Ethan realized, with a sickening jolt, he hadn't seen in 3 years. She was wearing a sweater he didn't recognize, sitting in a coffee shop he'd never been to. Her hand was resting on a forearm that wasn't his. The arm belonged to a man with paint-stained cuticles and a cheap leather watch. Then, a screenshot of a text message. He looks at me like I'm a building he needs to fix. You look at me like I'm the art on the wall. I can't breathe in this house anymore, Julian. Ethan read the line again. Like a building he needs to fix. He set the glass down. His hand didn't shake. Ethan was an architect. He understood load-bearing structures. He knew that when a hairline fracture appeared in a foundation, the collapse wasn't a possibility. It was a mathematical certainty. The only variable was time. He walked slowly down the hallway, the plush carpet swallowing the sound of his footsteps. He pushed the bedroom door open. The room smelled of lavender and the expensive night cream Elena used religiously. She was asleep on her side. Her dark hair fanned out across the silk pillowcase. She looked peaceful, innocent. For a brief, violent second, Ethan wanted to wake her. He wanted to scream, to drag her out of bed and shove the iPad in her face, to demand to know who Julian was and why his paint-stained hands were worth destroying a decade of marriage. He wanted to shatter the quiet. But Ethan didn't scream. He never screamed. Chaos was for people who couldn't control their environment. He watched her for a long time, listening to the rain batter the glass. He thought about the dinner they were supposed to host on Friday. He thought about their daughter, Leo, sleeping in the room next door. He thought about the prenup that his father had insisted on, a document Elena had signed with a roll of her eyes, calling it unromantic. Slowly, Ethan backed out of the room and closed the door, leaving it open just a crack, the way she liked it. He went back to the kitchen, picked up the iPad, and disabled the sink. Then, he sat down at the island, opened his laptop, and created a new folder on his encrypted drive. He named it simply Case File 001. He didn't cry. He didn't throw the glass. He simply began to screenshot everything. If Elena wanted to leave the building, Ethan would ensure she didn't walk out with a single brick. The following 3 weeks were an exercise in structural endurance. Ethan learned that the human face is capable of a terrifying degree of dishonesty. He learned to kiss his wife goodbye at the door, tasting the mint of her toothpaste, and knowing with statistical probability that she would be tasting Julian's cheap cigarettes by noon. He didn't confront her. He didn't change the passcode on the alarm system. He didn't stop paying the credit card bill that now included charges for art supplies at a store in Wicker Park that he knew was 2 doors down from Julian's studio. Instead, Ethan went to work. Not to his architectural firm, though he kept up appearances there too. His real work took place in the corner office of Arthur Garrison, a divorce attorney whose reputation in Chicago was somewhere between a surgeon and a butcher. "You have 2 options, Ethan," Garrison said, sliding a heavy paperweight across his mahogany desk. The office smelled of old leather and expensive cologne. "You can be the wounded husband who screams and throws clothes on the lawn. It feels good for about an hour. Or you can be the sniper. You wait. You smile. You let her think she's getting away with it until the ink is dry." Ethan looked at the dossier Garrison had already compiled. It was thicker than the one Ethan had started that first night. Private investigators were expensive, but they were thorough. There were photos of Elena and Julian at a dive bar, holding hands under a table. There were timestamps of when she entered his apartment and when she left. "I want full custody," Ethan said, his voice flat. "I want her to know that she chose a temporary feeling over her life with us." "Then you have to be perfect," Garrison replied, leaning forward, his eyes cold and sharp behind rimless glasses. "For the next month, you are the husband of the year. You take her to dinners. You ask about her day. You do not sleep on the couch. You give her no reason to suspect the hammer is falling. We file on the anniversary. It's cruel, but it catches them off guard. Surprise is your only leverage." Ethan nodded. He treated the instruction like a blueprint. That evening, the performance resumed. The penthouse was warm, filled with the smell of roasted chicken and rosemary. Elena was in the kitchen, pouring wine. She looked radiant, lighter somehow. The affair was giving her a glow that Ethan used to think was reserved for him. "You're late," she said, but she was smiling. She walked over and brushed a piece of lint from his lapel. Ethan didn't flinch. He forced his muscles to relax, forcing his breathing to slow. He placed a hand on her waist, the same waist Julian had held in the photo. It felt the same. That was the horror of it. It felt exactly the same. "Meeting ran long," Ethan lied smoothly. "The West Loop project. How was the gallery?" "Oh, busy," Elena said, turning back to the stove. "We're prepping for the Emerging Artists Showcase. It's chaotic." She was lying. The PI report said she had spent the afternoon walking by the lake with Julian. Ethan watched her move around the kitchen, her movements fluid and practiced. He felt a profound sense of vertigo, as if the floor of the penthouse had turned to glass. They ate dinner together. They talked about Leo's kindergarten orientation. They discussed summer vacation plans for Martha's Vineyard, plans Ethan knew would never happen. He watched her mouth move, watched the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed at something Leo said. Later that night, lying in the dark, Ethan listened to the rhythm of her breathing. He stared at the ceiling, calculating assets, visualizing the division of property, rehearsing the moment the process server would walk up to her. She shifted in her sleep, her hand drifting across the sheets to rest on his chest. It was an unconscious gesture of comfort, of belonging. Ethan carefully, slowly lifted her hand and placed it back on her own side of the bed. He turned his back to her, eyes wide open, waiting for the sun to rise so he could continue the demolition. October 14th dawned with a deceptive brightness, the kind of crisp Chicago autumn morning that usually signaled new beginnings. For Ethan, it signaled the end. He had left the penthouse before Elena woke up, leaving a card on the kitchen counter, next to the espresso machine. The card was heavy cream stock, embossed with their initials. Inside, in his architectural all-caps handwriting, he had written, "I have a surprise for you. Be at the gallery at 11 Cope. Happy 10th. Ethan sat in his office downtown, 30 blocks away. He wasn't working. He was staring at his phone, waiting for a text message from a man named unsubtly Process Service Miller. At the gallery in River North, the mood was electric. Elena was floating. The guilt of the affair had been compartmentalized, tucked away in the back of her mind like a winter coat she didn't need yet. Today, she was just a wife celebrating a decade of marriage to one of the city's most successful men. 10 years. Her assistant, Chloe, sighed, arranging a display of modern sculptures near the entrance. That's a lifetime, Elena. What do you think he got you? The diamond tennis bracelet? Elena laughed, checking her reflection in the glass of a framed photograph. She smoothed her silk blouse. Ethan isn't usually the jewelry type, but lately, he's been different, attentive. I think he might actually surprise me. She checked her watch. 10:58 a.m. She felt a thrill of anticipation. Julian was a fire that warmed her, but Ethan was the bedrock. She had convinced herself she could keep both, the thrill and the security. It was the hubris of someone who had never watched a structure fail under stress. At 11:03, the gallery door chimed. Elena turned, a bright, practiced smile already on her lips. She expected Ethan, perhaps holding a box, or maybe a courier with an extravagant floral arrangement. Instead, a man in a nondescript gray windbreaker stepped inside. He looked out of place among the stark white walls and avant-garde installations. He held a thick manila envelope in his hand. He scanned the room, ignoring the art, his eyes landing on Elena. "Elena Caldwell?" the man asked. His voice was flat, bored. It was just a job to him. "Yes?" Elena stepped forward, her smile faltering slightly. "Is this from my husband?" "In a manner of speaking," the man said. He walked up to her, extended the envelope, and thrust it into her hands. The gallery was quiet. The few patrons browsing the exhibits stopped to watch. The interaction felt wrong, discordant. "You've been served?" the man said. He turned and walked out before Elena could even blink. The envelope felt heavy, like a brick. Elena looked down at it. There was no ribbon, no card, just the logo of a law firm she recognized. Garrison and Associates. The most aggressive divorce litigators in the state. Her fingers trembled as she tore the tab. She pulled out the top document. The bold, black text at the top of the page seemed to vibrate. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Petitioner, Ethan James Caldwell. Respondent, Elena Marie Caldwell. The sound of the gallery, the low hum of the HVAC, the distant traffic, Chloe asking, "Elena, what is it?" dropped away. The world narrowed down to that single piece of paper. Adultery, irreconcilable differences, sole custody. Ethan knew. The realization hit her not like a wave, but like a physical blow to the stomach. He knew, he had known all along. The dinners, the politeness, the hand on her waist last night. It wasn't love. It was evidence gathering. He hadn't forgotten the anniversary. He had weaponized it. Across town, Ethan's phone buzzed on his mahogany desk. A single message from Miller, served. 11:05 a.m. Ethan picked up his phone and blocked Elena's number. Then he swiveled his chair around to look out at the city skyline. He didn't feel happy. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt cold, like a man standing in the wreckage of a house he had just burned down to kill the termites. He opened his laptop and sent an email to his assistant. Cancel the dinner reservation at Alinea and have the locks changed at the penthouse by noon. The taxi ride from the gallery to the penthouse took 12 minutes. In that time, Elena called Ethan 7 times. 7 times, the call went straight to voicemail. The mechanical indifference of the automated operator felt like a slap. When she arrived at the Langham, the doorman, Henry, a man who had smiled at her every morning for 5 years, who had accepted her Christmas bonuses and asked about Leo's ballet recitals, couldn't meet her eyes. He stood by the revolving brass doors, staring intently at the pattern of the marble floor. "Good afternoon, Henry," Elena said, her voice tight, trying to project a normalcy she didn't feel. She moved toward the elevators. "Mrs. Caldwell," Henry said, stepping in her path. He winced, as if he expected her to strike him. "I'm sorry. I can't let you up." Elena stopped. The lobby was quiet, the scent of fresh lilies heavy in the air. "Excuse me?" "Mr. Caldwell." He instructed the building management. "Your fob has been deactivated. He said you are no longer a resident." Henry's face flushed a deep, embarrassed red. "He left some bags for you. They're in the storage office." Elena stared at him. The humiliation was absolute. It wasn't just a lockout, it was a public eviction. Ethan knew she would come here. He knew Henry would be on shift. He had choreographed this moment to strip her of her dignity in front of the help. "I live here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "My daughter is upstairs. Leo is with Mr. Caldwell's sister in Lake Forest," Henry said softly. "I'm really sorry, ma'am." Elena turned and walked out, her heels clicking sharply on the stone. She felt the eyes of the concierge burning into her back. She sat on a bench outside, the wind whipping her hair across her face, and opened her banking app. Account frozen. Joint checking. Access denied. Credit card ending in 4490, deactivated. She had $10,000 in her own savings account, money she had kept separate, just in case. But the liquid assets, the black cards, the leverage, were gone. Ethan had turned off the tap. By evening, the whispers had started. In Chicago's tight-knit circle of high-net-worth individuals, news traveled faster than light. Ethan hadn't posted anything on social media. He hadn't given an interview. He had done something far more effective. He had let the court filings speak for him. Adultery. The word was a scarlet letter. Ethan played the role of the dignified, betrayed husband to perfection, simply by disappearing. He was unreachable. He was working. He was caring for their daughter. Meanwhile, Elena was left exposed. She checked into a boutique hotel using her personal debit card. Her phone began to light up, but not with support. It was curiosity. "OMG, Elena, is it true? I heard about the filing. Are you okay? Saw Julian at the gallery. Does this have to do with him?" She sat on the edge of the hotel bed. the room generic and impersonal. She looked at the text from Julian. "Hey, heard some crazy rumors? Call me?" She didn't call him. Suddenly, the artistic chaos that had seemed so romantic in the afternoons of their affair felt flimsy against the steel-reinforced wall Ethan had built around her. Julian offered escape, Ethan offered survival, and Ethan had just evicted her from survival. She opened her laptop and typed an email to the best crisis PR manager in the city, but her fingers hovered over the send button. She realized then that Ethan wasn't just divorcing her. He was erasing her. He was dismantling the version of Elena Caldwell that existed in their world, brick by brick, until there was nothing left but the woman who cheated. Elena closed the laptop. She wouldn't apologize. Not yet. If he wanted a war, he would get one. But as she looked out at the city skyline, at the distant lights of the penthouse she could no longer enter, she realized she had brought a knife to a nuclear standoff. The playground of the Parker School was a fortress of privilege, surrounded by wrought iron fences and manicured hedges that shielded the children of Chicago's elite from the city grid. Elena stood across the street, huddled inside her trench coat. She wasn't supposed to be here. The emergency temporary orders filed by Garrison and Associates 48 hours ago were specific. Supervised visitation only. No unauthorized contact at educational facilities. But she needed to see her. It had been 4 days. 4 days since the lockout. 4 days since her life had been packed into cardboard boxes and shoved into a storage unit. The bell rang, a sharp, metallic sound that cut through the gray afternoon. A stream of children in navy blue uniforms spilled out. Elena scanned the sea of heads, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She saw the car first. Ethan's black Range Rover pulled up to the curb with the silent precision of a hearse. Stepped out. He was wearing a charcoal wool coat, his posture impeccable. He didn't look like a man in the middle of a divorce. He looked like a man who had just closed a merger. Then she saw Leo. 5 years old, clutching a pink backpack, her hair in slightly uneven pigtails. Ethan had done them. The sight of those crooked pigtails broke Elena more than the lawsuit had. It was proof that life was continuing without her. Leo spotted the Rover and ran toward Ethan, but then she stopped. She looked around, her small head turning, scanning the waiting parents. She was looking for her mother. "Leo," Elena whispered, the word catching in her throat. She took a step off the curb. Ethan saw her instantly. He didn't shout. He didn't scowl. He simply placed a hand on Leo's shoulder, guiding her firmly toward the open car door. He leaned down, saying something into the girl's ear. Leo looked across the street, her eyes finding Elena. Elena waved, a desperate, frantic motion. "Leo, baby!" Leo started to step toward her, a smile breaking across her face. "Mommy!" Ethan's grip on the child's shoulder tightened, not enough to hurt, but enough to hold. He turned his back to Elena, effectively acting as a human shield. He picked Leo up, depositing her into the back seat and buckling her in with efficient, robotic movements. He slammed the heavy door shut, sealing the child inside the soundproof, bulletproof glass bubble of his control. He walked around to the driver's side, pausing just long enough to look across the street. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. He pulled his phone from his pocket, held it up, and took a photo of Elena standing there. Evidence, violation of temporary order, harassment, instability. Elena froze. She realized the trap too late. If she ran over there, if she screamed, if she pounded on the window, she would be the crazy ex-wife terrorizing her family. She would be the woman the court documents described. Erratic, selfish, dangerous. Ethan got in the car and drove away. He didn't speed. He merged perfectly into traffic, leaving Elena standing in the exhaust fumes. Inside the Rover, Leo was quiet. "Why didn't Mommy come over?" Ethan looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror. His chest ached, a dull throb he ignored. He told himself this was necessary. A clean break was better than a jagged one. Structural integrity required removing the compromised elements. "Mommy isn't feeling well, Leo," Ethan said, his voice calm, steady, lying. "She's confused right now. We have to let her get better before she can play with us." "Is she sad?" Leo asked, touching the cold glass of the window. "Yes," Ethan said. "She made some mistakes that made everyone very sad. But we're going to be okay. Just you and me." He turned up the radio, drowning out the silence. He was winning the case, but in the rearview mirror, he saw the first crack in his daughter's eyes. The conference room at Sterling & Associates was designed to intimidate. It was a glass box suspended 50 floors above the loop, air-conditioned to a temperature that required a suit jacket. In the center sat a long mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine, separating the combatants. Ethan sat on one side, flanked by Arthur Garrison. Opposite him sat Elena and her attorney, a sharp-featured woman named Rebecca Solis who had a reputation for dissecting narcissists. A videographer stood in the corner, the red light of the camera blinking like an unblinking eye. A court reporter's fingers hovered over her stenotype machine, ready to transcribe the ruin of a decade. "Mr. Caldwell," Solis began, her voice deceptively soft, "you've stated in your filing that my client's infidelity was the sole cause of the marriage's breakdown. Is that correct?" "Yes," Ethan said. He didn't look at Elena. She was wearing a simple navy dress, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked thinner. "And you would describe yourself as an attentive husband?" "I provided everything," Ethan replied, his tone clipped. "We live in a $6 million penthouse. Our daughter attends the best private school in the state. Elena has never had to worry about a bill in 10 years. I didn't ask about finance, Mr. Caldwell. I asked about attention." Solis slid a document across the table. "This is your travel itinerary for the years 2022 and 2023. You were out of the country for 180 days in 2023. Is that accurate?" Ethan glanced at the paper. "My firm has international projects. Dubai, Tokyo. I work to support my family." "On November 12, 2023, Solis continued, reading from a notepad, "Elena was hospitalized for a miscarriage. Where were you, Mr. Caldwell?" The room went deadly silent. The hum of the server room down the hall seemed to roar in Ethan's ears. He felt Garrison stiffen beside him. "I was in Singapore," Ethan said, his voice dropping an octave. "The terrifying of the Marina Bay project. It was a critical phase." "Did you come home?" I couldn't. The contract." "So you sent flowers," Solis interrupted, her eyes hard. "And you didn't return for another 3 weeks. You left your wife to grieve the loss of your child alone." "I was building our future," Ethan snapped, the veneer cracking. He leaned forward, ignoring Garrison's hand on his arm. "I was securing the legacy that allows her to sit in art galleries and play at being a curator. I was the one holding up the roof." "No, Mr. Caldwell," Solis said, leaning back. "You were building a cage. You weren't holding up the roof. You were burying her under it." Ethan looked at Elena then. He expected to see shame. He expected to see the woman who had cheated on him, the villain of his story. Instead, he saw pity. Elena looked at him with a profound, exhausted sadness. It wasn't the look of a woman who had simply sought pleasure elsewhere. It was the look of a woman who had been starving to death in a banquet hall. "The affair, Mr. Caldwell," Solace said, closing her folder, "was a symptom, not the disease. You filed for divorce because she found someone who listened to her. And that is the one thing you could never afford to buy." Ethan felt a cold sweat prickle at the back of his neck. The logical, structural narrative he had built, "I am good, she is bad," shuddered. For the first time, he realized that the courtroom wouldn't just be a judgment of her morality, it would be an autopsy of his heart. He took a sip of water. His hand shook, just once. The red light on the camera caught it. The distinct sound of a paper envelope tearing echoed through courtroom 402 like a gunshot. Ethan sat rigidly at the plaintiff's table, his hands folded on the polished wood. He had requested this test. It was the final nail in the structure he was building around Elena. He had convinced himself that if Leo was his, indisputably, biologically his, he could argue that Elena was merely an incubator who had voided her warranty, and if, by some dark twist, Leo belonged to Julian, then Ethan would wash his hands of the entire mess, severing the limb to save the body. Logic dictated one of two outcomes. Ethan was ready for both. Judge Holloway, a woman with graying hair and eyes that had seen too many broken families, pulled the document from the sleeve. She adjusted her glasses. She didn't speak immediately. She read the page, then stopped. She frowned, flipping to the second page, then back to the first. The silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating. The court reporter's hands hovered over the keys. Even the ventilation system seemed to hold its breath. "Counsel," Judge Holloway said. Her voice wasn't authoritative anymore. It was confused. "Please approach the bench." Ethan frowned. He glanced at Garrison. The lawyer looked equally perplexed. They stood up and walked toward the dais, meeting Rebecca Solace and a pale, trembling Elena. "Is there an error in the filing, Your Honor?" Garrison asked smoothly. "No," the judge said. She held the paper with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. "Mr. Caldwell, you requested this paternity test to establish lineage for custody determination. You insisted on a comparative analysis with the sample provided by the co-respondent, Mr. Vance, as well." "I did," Ethan said. "I want the truth on the record." "The truth," the judge repeated. She looked at Ethan, then at Elena. "The lab report excludes Julian Vance as the biological father. The probability is 0%. Elena let out a small, broken sob of relief. She covered her mouth. "However," the judge continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried to the back of the room, "the report also excludes you, Mr. Caldwell." Ethan blinked. The words didn't make sense. It was a syntax error. "Excuse me?" "You are excluded as the biological father of Leo Caldwell," Holloway stated, sliding the paper across the mahogany. "Probability of paternity, 0.00%. The courtroom froze. Ethan looked at the paper. He saw the numbers, the stark black ink against the white page. Excluded. "That's impossible," Ethan whispered. The anger rose, hot and fast. He turned slowly to Elena. "Who is he? If it wasn't the painter, who was it? How long have you been lying to me?" "I didn't," Elena cried out, her voice cracking. She looked terrified, her eyes darting between the paper and Ethan. "Ethan, I swear to God there was no one else. Leo is ours. The clinic." The word hung in the air. The clinic. 6 years ago, the IVF treatments, The sterile rooms, the petri dishes, the thousands of dollars spent to ensure the Caldwell legacy continued. They had trusted science. They had trusted the process. Ethan looked at Elena's face. He saw the genuine, horrific shock mirroring his own. She hadn't cheated on him 5 years ago. She hadn't lied about Leo. The realization hit him with the force of a collapsing skyscraper. Leo, the little girl with the crooked pigtails, the girl he had driven to school, the girl he was fighting to possess like a piece of high-value real estate. She was a stranger, a medical error, a ghost in the laboratory machine. Ethan felt the ground beneath him give way. He looked at his hands, the hands that had built towers of steel and glass, the hands that had signed the divorce papers, the hands that had pushed his wife away to protect his bloodline. There was no bloodline. The judge sat back, taking off her glasses, looking at the two people standing before her, not as adversaries, but as victims of a cosmic joke. "It appears," the judge said softly into the silence, "that this court has no jurisdiction over biology today." Ethan couldn't breathe. The silence in the room wasn't quiet anymore. It was roaring. The wind coming off Lake Michigan was biting, carrying the distinct scent of coming winter, but Ethan didn't zip up his coat. He sat on the wrought iron bench, his hands deep in his pockets, watching the playground. Leo was on the swings. She was pumping her legs furiously, her crooked pigtails flying behind her, trying to touch the gray sky with the toes of her sneakers. She looked exactly the same as she had a month ago. She had the same laugh, the same gap-toothed smile, the same way of tilting her head when she was thinking, and yet, biologically, she was a stranger. Ethan shifted his gaze to the woman sitting on the other end of the bench. Elena was staring at Leo, too. She held a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold long ago. The space between them on the bench, about 2 feet, felt like a canyon, but it was no longer mined with explosives. The war was over. Not because anyone had won, but because the battlefield had ceased to exist. "The lawyers say we have a case against the clinic," Ethan said quietly. His voice sounded rusty. "Malpractice, negligence, damages in the millions." Elena didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the swinging girl. "I don't care about the money, Ethan. I don't care about the clinic." "I know." "She's ours," Elena whispered, her voice fierce and trembling. "I carried her. I nursed her. You taught her how to ride that bike. You sat up with her when she had the flu. That's real. That has to be real." Ethan looked at his hands. For months he had been obsessed with the architecture of truth. He had wanted the blueprints to match the building. He had torn his life apart looking for a structural flaw, convinced that if he found it, he could justify evicting Elena from his heart. He had found the flaw, but it wasn't moral. It was biological. And staring at it now, he realized how insignificant it was compared to the sheer weight of 5 years of memory. "I withdrew the petition for sole custody this morning," Ethan said. Elena turned her head slowly. Her eyes were red-rimmed, stripped of the makeup and artifice she used to wear like armor. She looked tired. She looked human. "You did?" "I can't divorce her mother," Ethan said, looking back at the playground. "We aren't husband and wife anymore, Elena. I can't. I can't go back to what we were. The trust is gone, and maybe the love is too, at least the kind that makes a marriage work. But we are the only 2 people on earth who know the truth about her. We are the only family she has." He finally looked at her. "I'm not going to take her away from you. I never should have tried." Elena let out a breath that seemed to deflate her entire body. She nodded, wiping a stray tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. "Thank you." "I'll move into the condo on Wacker," Ethan continued, his voice steadying, finding the rhythm of a new plan. "We'll split the week, 50-50, no lawyers, no support hearings. We just raise her." "Okay," Elena said softly. "Okay." On the playground, Leo reached the apex of her swing. She let go of the chains and jumped, soaring through the air for a terrifying, beautiful second, before landing in the mulch with a clumsy thud. She stood up, brushed off her knees, and looked toward the bench. She waved. "Daddy! Mommy! Watch this!" Ethan stood up. He felt heavy, grieving the perfect life he thought he was building. But as he looked at the little girl running toward them, he realized the foundation was still there. It just wasn't made of DNA. It was made of something much harder to break. He stepped forward, side by side with the woman who was no longer his wife, and raised his hand to wave back. "We're watching, Leo," Ethan called out. "We're right here."